Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 542 of the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Doc Lewis Vinyl, and my job is to bring you some of Australia's best and brightest lure fishers each and every week to share with us, of course, some tips about how to catch some fish on lures so we can do the same things that they do. Now, today's guest, Nabeel Issa, probably doesn't need that much of an introduction. He's been on the show before. We've had a great chat about longtail tuna in Moreton Bay. We've had a great chat about snapper fishing off the Gold Coast. We've had a great chat about fishing for Jewfish in Moreton Bay. And not only that, but he's been on the show as a sonar guru as well, walking us through how to find Jewfish in Moreton Bay in a sonar live masterclass that we streamed a little while back, about 12 or 18 months ago now, I guess. So Nabeel, welcome back to the show, mate. Great to have you on board. Looking forward to an awesome chat, mate.
Thanks, Greg. It's good to be back. I was actually listening to one of the podcasts not too long ago and wondering, I don't actually think there's much I could offer, but when you had the idea of tonight's discussion, I thought that's actually going to be pretty good, something we can go through.
Awesome. Well, I doubt, I really, really doubt that you don't have much to offer, mate. I reckon there's plenty more that we can mine from your brain. But look, you've been a regular on the show. You're almost part of the furniture, mate. So we really do appreciate when you come on board. You've always got some words of wisdom, some great ideas, different approaches. Love all of that stuff. And I know that tonight's going to be a really entertaining conversation as well. So, mate, just to give people a little bit of a background, I said we wouldn't go back over old ground, so we won't spend a lot of time on it, but you've lived, in Southeast Queensland pretty much your whole life, haven't you?
Yes, I've lived in Brisbane since I was 6 months old. My family moved here and haven't moved too far from there. I live about, to give people an idea, I'm about 45 minutes drive away from the Gold Coast. I'm about 30 minutes drive away to fish Moreton Bay and about 30 minutes to fish the Brisbane River. So the closest ramp for me is about 30 minutes. So, I've got quite a wide variety of areas to pick. So, and kind of a hindrance as well. There's just so many options when you live here on where to go fishing.
And that can be a bit of a problem, can't it? You can get analysis paralysis. As the saying goes, you can spend too much time thinking about where you might go and where's a better place. And sometimes it's better to just pick a spot and go.
Yeah, quite often, it's just a decision where Brisbane River or Moreton Bay, or do I go to the Gold Coast and then pick one and then go home? And of course, somebody's Instagram story, they're killing it in the other spot where I should have went. So pretty standard, yeah.
Yeah, of course. That all goes without saying. But mate, what a part of the world to be where you've got so many options that you just don't know which one to go for first.
Yeah, good problem.
Good problem to have. All right. So as I said, we're going to go through 5 of those options and we're going to focus on the spring months because we're getting into sort of towards mid-August now. By the time this goes live, it'll be the 12th of August, Friday the 12th of August. So yeah, halfway through August, only a couple of weeks until we're into the spring months, the weather starts to warm up. And you're in a part of the world where you've got both tropical and temperate species kind of meeting and mixing, and so things shift around as the seasons change. What kind of happens on the Gold Coast in terms of changes in fish and changes in fish behaviour over those spring months?
Yep. So, the whole Southeast Queensland region, spring means warm. And a lot of the fish, they just thrive or they come alive when that warm weather comes. And, part of the reason I was excited to talk to you about fishing in the spring is because that's my favorite time to fish. For example, if anyone asks me, springtime is when it happens. That's when it starts. The best snapper we've caught generally, they are caught in September, I think it was, off the Gold Coast. Bass fishing in the dam, springtime is excellent for it. You look at some of the tournament results in years gone past, Somerset Dam, for example, all the big bags. Springtime, September, October. And then Brisbane River, again, same deal. I find fairly cool in the winter, but as soon as that warmer weather kicks in, dewies, threadies, they start to show up. So it all kind of happens here around then. And I think it's just really good time for fishing.
This will come as no news to anyone who lives anywhere in Queensland, but for those who live further south that might be listening in, we don't kind of get, in Queensland, we often don't get that transition from winter to summer. It's kind of sometimes like the switch gets flicked, on Monday it's winter and then the next day you get up and it's 30 degrees at 9 o'clock in the morning. You go, okay, well, summer's here now. And so that can happen quite quickly, can't it?
Yeah, that's it. You'll normally feel it as well, and it's a change of seasons. And actually one of the things that you'll notice if you're a Brisbane local is the jacaranda trees start flowering. That's a good sign that, the temps are changing. Generally that means stuff is happening in the air. Water temps are rising. It affects everything. It affects the fish.
Yeah.
It affects the weather. We start to drop off those westerly mornings as well. That's a big thing. Those cool wind stuff is also lots of positives come out in spring.
Yeah, yeah. Also, this time of year, the jacaranda is a great indication that things are changing, no doubt about it. All right, so Nabeel, we are going to walk through 5 locations. We're not going to get too specific here, so we're not going to ask you for lat longs or anything like that, but we're going to go through 5 sort of general locations that fish really well during the spring months, and I'm looking forward to, especially now you've given us that bit of an introduction, you got me warmed up, almost salivating here at the thought of some of those species that you talked about and knowing just how good the fishing can be in your part of the world. But we're going to go through those 5 spots and get a little bit of advice about what species we can expect, a little bit of advice on how to find an appropriate place to fish, maybe some tips on what lures to use, and then we're going to move on. So reasonably detailed information without going too deep. And of course, you've already been on the show several times and others have been on the show several times to give us that deeper information. So we'll link through to that from the show notes. But let's start to delve in here, mate. So you've got 5 places that you're going to talk about. What's the first one that you're going to start us off with?
Yep. So I guess as a general overview, what we'll do is we'll look at the areas I fish. So let's say this far south is the Gold Coast.
Okay.
Up to a northern end of, say, Moreton Bay, and then out further west to the dams, North Pine Dam, Somerset, Inns, that sort of stuff. So that's the general area we'll go through because that's kind of the stuff I'm used to fishing.
Cool.
So starting at the bottom, Gold Coast.
Okay.
Big area just in itself. But if we say we look at offshore Gold Coast to start with, these months as well, springtime, a good thing of springtime is you generally get a lot more settled weather, fairly light southeast mornings. Once that westerlies go, once the temps are up a little bit, it does make it quite nice in the mornings. And I like that sort of weather. Southeast is generally, for most fishing, pretty good. So you get what I'm getting at. You get the opportunity to head offshore as well. So you got that option there. And snapper, for me, springtime is a really good time to target them.
Okay.
I know a lot of people will say winter, and winter is great too. I find you get the bigger fish, though, in those spring months, September, October. Most of the bigger fish, like we're talking 80 centimeters plus, that I've caught are generally in those transition months, the spring months.
All right. Okay. So you must be, from what you've told us so far, you must be getting to the point where you're starting to roll around in bed at night, just not being able to quite get to sleep because your overactive imagination is thinking about all these great fish that you're about to start targeting.
Well, it's close season on snapper, so I'm hanging to actually get out and chase them. I think next Monday we'll be able to start fishing for them again. And like I said, it's a good time. You can get the weather to line up with a day that you're free. I really like fishing for snapper this time of the year.
Okay. So let's just break down a little bit what we need to know about fishing for snapper offshore from the Gold Coast during the spring, mate. So give us a bit of a rundown on things like tides and time of day and that kind of stuff. What are the important things that we need to know there? Yep.
So what I normally do is, if I'm going offshore, I go early morning. It's just a habit. Get out early, try and get the good weather, try and get out as early as I can, beat the traffic as well. And, with snapper, that low light period is always very pivotal, so it's well worth getting out there for that.
Yeah.
I normally fish on the shallower scale for offshore fishing, I guess, off the Gold Coast. So I'm in about 30 meters to 40 meters of water.
Yep.
Any deeper, and it's too much winding for me, so I prefer the shallower stuff. And if you want the specific details, the podcast we did will probably go into the finite info, but fishing soft plastics majority of the time, 3/8 half-ounce jig heads, and that sort of thing, fishing the bottom. And one of the things that I tell a lot of people that's really key to getting to being successful with those biggest snapper, especially the bigger ones, the smart ones, is the sink. So how that lure falls. So I put a lot of emphasis on making sure that I get that lure to sink on a slack line. I don't like it dragging behind the boat. I like that lure to sink as natural as possible. And if fish as light you get as you can, that the current and conditions will allow. So 3/8 is probably as light as I'll go. Sometimes if there's no current, you can get to a quarter ounce. It does take a while, like you're talking a couple of minutes to sink down, but that extra hang time really makes a big difference.
Okay.
It gives those fish a good look.
Yeah. And of course, people, when we talk about jig heads and jig weights and that kind of stuff, it's all about getting the lure to sink, as you said, sink naturally, sink on a slack line and all that kind of stuff. But it's not just jig head that we have to consider, is it? Because, if you change over from, for example, a curly tail to a jerk shad, or you change from a jerk shad to a paddle tail, any of those sorts of changes, the lures might have a bit more body, might have a bit more hang time just because of the nature of the lure itself. So
that's true.
So that's what you're kind of looking to get it to float down I mean, it's a good idea just to drop it alongside the boat, isn't it? Just see how it falls.
Exactly.
And make sure it's natural and then go from there and adjust if you have to.
Yep. It's a good point. You could fish let's say, gulp jerk shad, which is, fairly dense on a 1/4 ounce jigget, and that might fall at a similar rate to a style of bait junkie or a Z-Man curly tail that floats on a 3/8 ounce jigget. So
yep,
you do have to check that. And I think the best way is to actually rig it, have a cast, see how long it takes to get down. And if you're drifting 100 miles an hour and that Lewis doesn't get a chance to hit the bottom anywhere near your boat, well, then probably time to go heavier. So you can work it out pretty quick.
Yep. Now, are you casting ahead of the drift here, I'd assume?
Yep. So I guess since the last podcast, what I've done is I've bought a drift anchor as well, just to help slow down the drift.
Okay.
On the days when it's rough that you can't really use the electric, it's quite handy.
Okay.
And what I'm doing mostly is, slowing the drift down and just try and cast as far up current as I can. Leaving a lot of line, loose line, I should say, and then letting the boat sort of drift up to where the lure is.
Yes.
And usually by the time you get on top of it, the lure's at the bottom or close to the bottom.
Okay.
And then you can fish it for a bit and then repeat the process.
Okay. And what are your favourite soft plastics for this style of fishing? What sizes and what styles?
Yep. Generally fish 2 types. So I'll fish a jerk shad profile and a curly tail. The last probably year and a half, 2 years, I've been doing pretty well with the Daiwa 5-inch jerk shad, the bait junkie, the baby bass cut I really like, and the 4-inch curly tail. So both options I've caught plenty of snapper on. They're proven lures for forever, and then most people will have that sort of lure in the arsenal, but they just catch.
Yep. Excellent. All right, mate. And I guess we should probably talk about how to find fish as well, because there's a fair bit of water. Are you going out through the Seaway? How do you get to the offshore areas from the Gold Coast? Are you going out through the Southport Seaway?
Yeah, so I'll head out the Seaway, and I generally fish pretty close. I won't venture too far north or south from there. And like I said, I'm in 30 to 40 meters, and there's a lot of good spots and a lot of good ground in that range. Like if you head out the Seaway one day, if you've never been, do go out, you'll see the crowds and you'll know roughly where the main reefs are.
Yep.
What I just try and do is I just try and find patches of reef that aren't, heavily trafficked. So if you can find one, find where most of the boats are and move away, or generally I find that's a good thing. Another good tactic is if you can find the northern end generally of a reef where the current's coming down and hitting it, you'll find fish will generally hold to that side of the reef. So if all the boats are centered, then, maybe fishing that northern end or southern end, whichever way the current's coming and hitting it, will be a good area to start with.
Yep.
Another crucial thing, just in finding these things, is just making sure your sounder reads right as well. So,
that's
a whole other thing, but, you really want to make sure your sounder's tuned in and you can pick up ground while you're traveling at speed, because it's a whole ocean out there. So as you cover ground, you want to be trying to see as much as you can.
Yeah, exactly. You might have a market you're going to, but you may as well be looking for little blips and little bumps on the way that you can do a quick U-turn, a figure of 8 or 2, and see what's there and whether it's worth dropping a soft plastic down on it, because some of those isolated rocks and things, they can be some of the most productive places to fish. So you mentioned the tidal flow or the current, which at this time of year through spring, it's usually not too bad, is it? It starts to whistle through once summer arrives and the East Australian current starts to get a bit of a gale up.
Yeah. So springtime, you've probably still got that time when it's not really pumping yet. The wind will dictate a lot of that as well. If you get strong southeasters, it will push that current in closer, and then it will make it harder to fish. Similarly, when you get a northerly, it tends to push it out. You get that opportunity to actually fish for snapper. So we've had some sessions in summertime where, leading up to the day we fished, has been consistent northerlies, and it's actually pushed the current out wider, makes those in closer spots fishable for snapper. So while everyone's out wide chasing marlin or whatever, you still get that opportunity to fish for snapper in those closer grounds with reasonable current flow, nothing too, not making it unfishable anyway.
I mean, you want some current flow, don't you? Because the old adage, no run, no fun, definitely holds true for snapper.
Agreed. Yeah, there's plenty of times I can recall out there, middle of winter, it's dead calm, dead still, no movement, and it's no fish.
Very quiet. Yeah. Yep.
A bit of flow helps cover ground. Helps you give your drift some momentum.
Yeah. Now, speaking of drifting, one thing that caught my attention was you mentioned you've just invested in a sea anchor for those windy, rough days, but you also mentioned using electric, and I don't know many people that do that when they're drifting offshore, and it's something that I've actually done from time to time as well. Tell us about how you use your electric for drifting.
Yep. So you don't use it as much like you would, say, general estuary fishing where you're maneuvering the boat around specific spots or like that. The way I normally use it is just to aid the drift. So if I'm drifting north to south, for example, but there's a light westerly blowing, it can make it difficult to get a good drift and stay on top of your lure because you're kind of drifting on that angle. The electric motor pointed into the wind a little bit helps you keep that drift straight. So you can point your electric motor, let's say if you got a westerly blowing, into the wind.
Yes.
And only run it on low speed, 1 or 2, whatever the setting is. And it just helps keep the boat in that straight line so that when you do drift, you're drifting still north to south with your lure because your lure is going to drift with the current, not with the wind. So it helps you stay in contact with it as much. And with the electric, there are occasions when I have spot locked, but not often. Sometimes you do find a good patch of fish that are, sitting in a particular spot. And if the current's not too hard, you can, and your motor's powerful enough, you can hold current there. But again, in that depth of water, I don't really like doing it because it's hard to actually fish the bottom because you got to, rip a cast up current. By the time it hits the bottom, it's basically under the boat or past the boat, and you've got to wind it in again. So you don't get a lot of fishing time with it.
No, and look, that was a brilliant explanation, mate, of how to use an electric motor offshore, and that's exactly what I do as well. Is that just keep that boat. I mean, you really want the boat to be drifting with the current rather than the wind. And I guess if you throw a sea anchor over the side, that's exactly what it's doing. It's anchoring the boat movement to the current, so it's slowing down or reducing the amount of influence that the wind has. But the electric motor can do exactly the same thing. Obviously, if the wind's really starting to get up, then the electric's going to struggle a bit more, so you might switch over. So love all of that.
Yeah, and like a good tip that was taught to me was throw your lure under the boat and then use your electric motor to follow it. And that'll help you keep vertical with it, which is an important thing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good stuff. All right, mate. In terms of finding fish, we've said you're going to shoot out through the seaway. You're heading out to around that 30-metre mark. You're going to sound around, find a patch of rock where there's not too many other boats, and that's where you're going to fish. What does a good patch of rock look like for you in terms of, what's going to hold some snapper? You're looking for something with bait on it? Does it need to be a big, huge chunk of rock that comes up 4 or 5 metres off the bottom? Can it be something really low and flat? What are the snapper generally sitting on?
Yeah, so most of the ground off the Gold Coast, it's fairly flat.
Yep.
So you don't get big bommies that protrude up, and that makes noticeable visual difference when you're out there.
Yep.
So the general structure, you're probably looking at, if we're in 30 to 40 meters, you might be on a rock or reef system that protrudes 2 or 3 meters off the bottom, but it's quite like a big reef system. And there'll be ups and downs within that as well where the fish will sit. So you will find bait, which is, if you find bait straight away, that's where you want to be fishing. But a lot of time you won't see bait. You'll just see the odd fish here and there, and that's still worth fishing. My favorite spot for big snapper, it's just one rock.
Okay.
When I say rock, it's like, let's say, a tennis court size reef. And I fish it without even sounding it every time. I don't waste time, but I prefer not to drive on top of it with the motor because that potentially scares or puts the fish off. So every time I head out, when I go and fish that spot, I'm setting up for a drift without even looking and doing a blind drift over it. So sometimes,
of course,
sounding the fish isn't necessarily necessary. It's just more about knowing if the structure is there. Like, that's a big thing for me, fishing over structure. You just want to be making sure that you're on reef. Otherwise, if you're on sand and not realizing it, you can be wasting time.
Yep, absolutely. All right, mate. Anything else we need to know? We probably haven't talked about tackle. Maybe just give us a quick overview. I mean, you did talk about this in the previous episode where we focused on snapper, but maybe just give us a quick rundown on a rod reel line leader combo that you'd recommend.
Yep, sure. So I generally fish on the lighter side for snapper, which people tend to look at me sideways when I tell them, but we normally run a 3 or 4,000 size Daiwa spinning reel.
Yep.
15-pound braid to 20-pound braid, and leaders 16 and 20 pound. So 16-pound on a 90-centimeter snapper is pretty light, so you do have to be careful with it. I have yet to be busted off, and like I said, the reef system isn't particularly gnarly, so they don't normally get you back in there, but I say that now, next time I go out, I'll probably get busted off.
They're also a species that doesn't tend to dive into a reef and brick you either, I think with snapper, a bit like Jewfish, if you get reefed, it's because they're swimming somewhere and there's reef between you and them more often than not.
Accidentally, yeah. And yeah, so whatever the reason, these fish, they tend to be a bit safer. And then we run 3/8 half-ounce jig heads majority of the time for our soft plastics. And the rod we would use, say, a 3 to 6 or a 4 to 8 kilo rod.
Okay.
7 foot fast action, just something that, it's light and comfortable to fish plastics with.
Yeah, and you want that fast action so you can actually impart some action to the lure when you're in 30 metres of water with a 3/8 or half ounce jig head.
Yeah,
Yep.
it does help, yeah.
Perfect. Well, mate, anything else we need to know about fishing the Gold Coast offshore for snapper in spring before we move on to your second destination?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. We can
Okay.
move back inshore now.
Let's move to number 2, which is inshore Gold Coast.
Yep, so coming back in the seaway, I don't do a lot of fishing in estuary side of things in the Gold Coast, but the options there's a lot you can do as well. So if the weather's not great, which has happened on occasion where we've had to come back in, there's still plenty of options, and Jewfish and Flathead would be high on that list of fish to target in the spring months. So Flathead, I'm sure anyone that's Gold Coast, Brisbane, they know jumping pin, Flathead, that's springtime, right? Flathead Classic, those things all run together. So it's a good time of year, and especially, this winter's been excellent for Flathead. There's been cricket scores being caught, and coming into springtime is when you normally see the bigger fish caught as well. So anyone that fishes, or even the southern Gold Coast, Southport, Nerang, that sort of area, up to the jumping pin, fishing those shallow flats and some of the deeper areas around the bars, the seaway, jumping pin bar, will hold good Flathead, as well as good Jew as well.
Okay, cool. All right, so give us we've got 2 different species here. They're going to be quite different fishing styles, I would imagine, or looking for them in different places.
Yep.
So perhaps we'll focus on the Flathead first and then have a quick chat about the Jew. Does that work for you?
Yep, sure. I guess most of my Flathead fishing I fish shallow. A lot of guys will fish deeper in for them this time of year, but most of what I've done and what I've learned to do is just fish shallow. And I keep it pretty simple, really. There's a few sandbanks I like to fish with weed beds and basically do what most people do and just hop plastics and try and keep it pretty simple.
Okay. And, what's a good plastic that you recommend for Gold Coast Flathead during spring?
Yep. I like paddle tail profile soft plastics for Flathead.
Okay.
3 and 4 inch sort of size. So in the past I've used the Z-Man minnows, the Daiwa bait junkie minnows, that sort of style. There's obviously a million different types that work well. Zero to a few good ones as well. But I think that the key there is jig head weight. That's probably more so than the actual brand of plastic. More about jig head weight to help with your casting distance and also keep you in that zone where you want to be.
Yeah. I mean, this is quite different. We've just talked about snapper fishing where we really want that hang time. We want the jig to the soft plastic to actually look natural as it's falling. But here you're talking about fishing in shallow water. It doesn't fall for very long, even with a light jig head. But what you want to be able to do is get it down on the bottom and work it fairly briskly across the bottom, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's right. So, you want something, hit the bottom, cause a bit of commotion.
Yeah. But
also not so heavy that you're going to strain your wrist trying to throw it on a 2 to 4 kilo rod either. So, with reason, 1/6, 1/4, pretty good weights. You can cast them a long way, but so if you need to sink it down, you can. And if you need to hop it over a weed bed, you can do the same as well. So it's fairly versatile weight.
So you haven't gone to the sort of 9-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch soft plastics that a lot of people are using these days in search of those?
Nah, I've not really dove into the Flathead thing. And I think it's because just there's too many other things to do. And I just find myself chasing Jew or snapper or something else.
Yeah.
The Flathead, normally it's a backup plan for me. It's not necessarily a go-to thing to do.
Fair enough. Okay. In terms of finding Flathead, mate, what are we looking for in spring? Where are they going to be? You said shallow water, but sand flats, creek mouths, weed beds, where should we look?
Yeah, and I think the generic stuff was probably what everyone else will say as well, is looking for like sand flats, run out tides, drains, just key areas where fish will stage that a bait fish is going to swim past and get eaten. So, if you see a flat and you can see some water pushing in a certain point, then that's generally where I'll go.
Yeah.
An area where current's hitting, those sorts of things you want to look for. Because if you go to the jumping pin, obviously there's sand flats and weed beds and nice looking edges everywhere. So you want to try and just pinpoint on a particular spot where the fish is going to be. So where the current hits it, which side has got closer access to deep water, or if there's a drain coming out, or if there's mangroves on one side. And if a particular spot's going to hold more bait than another, then I'll probably start there.
Yep. Okay. Good stuff. All right, mate, let's switch over now. Unless you think there's anything else we need to know about the flathead fishing, let's have a quick chat about the Jewies.
Yep. So I've done more of the Jewy stuff in that sort of area over the years. And I guess the two main spots you hear of if you talk about Jew and Gold Coast would be the Seaway, the North Wall and the Seaway.
Yes.
And the Jumping Pin Bar. Basically, the two entrances, get a lot of tidal flow, access to the ocean, a very popular spot to target them. So similar to the fishing I do in Moreton Bay as well, the springtime's pretty good. That water temp helps, and it seems to bring them on. And my number one thing with fishing for Jew, 90% of the time is sounding them, finding them on the sounder. So I rely heavily on my side scan to locate the schools of fish. So, for example, if I'm fishing at the Gold Coast Seaway, I'd be doing a pass of the wall. If the weather allows, I'll kind of go up around the corner, sort of offshore, if you'd call it, just to cover the outside of the wall as well and have a look, see where they sit, if they're there. And then you can, if you know they're there, then you can work out your drift and try and get a good drift on them. And same with the jumping pin. It's a very similar situation where you're sort of scanning along that entrance to the system, deep water. There's some structure down deep, and it tends to hold those fish there. It's just a matter of putting in a bit of time and relying on your sounder to actually help you find them.
Yep. All right, let's talk tackle and lures for the Jewfish, and then before we do that, let's talk tackle and lures. I think we've talked about where to find them, so let's move on to the gear.
So similar gear, I guess, to the snapper.
Okay.
3 to 6, 4 to 8 kilo spin rods, but I'll use bait cast as well for Jew. But I'll fish different lures. So the majority of the time I'm fishing a vibe, and that'll be a fish trap or something similar to that profile. Heavy lure, really, that you can get down fairly quick. And I'll be fishing that on, like I said, either a spin or bait cast rod, 15 to 20 pound braid, and about 20 to 25 lead. I'll go a bit heavy on the leader for the Jew. Generally, that's because of the shark factor. Both those areas, you can lose fish to sharks. So if you get yourself a little bit more, I mean, it's not really going to help, but it helps, makes you think it's going to help. And gives you a bit more pulling power if you do need to put your thumb on the spool and just pull. At least it's not 16 pound and going to pop, so you got a bit more strength behind it.
A bit more stopping power there. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, what's a decent sized Jewy look like in that part of the world during the spring months, mate?
Well, I've seen people catch big ones, but most of the ones I've caught are school size, so 70, 80, sort of to 90 centimeter sort of size. But plenty of people catch them over a meter, 1.1, 1.2 even. So there are big fish around there. Yeah, definitely.
Some good fish around, yeah. Yep. All right, cool. So let's just go back to your lure. So you're using the soft vibes, Zurich fish traps. What size, mate? The 95 mil?
Yeah, the 95 mil. I think it's about 20 grams over there.
And how are you fishing them? Are you just teabagging those as you drift over the schools of Jew?
Yeah. So once you've identified where the fish are on your sounder and you can set up a drift to try and drift on them, you want to be making sure that your lure is going to hit that school. So heavy lure helps because you get that direct contact and you can get it to the bottom quickly.
Yep.
And you're not trying to guess where it is in the water column as you're drifting. So if you get it to the bottom, at least you know where it is. That's one variable out of the way. Then you just want to make sure that as you drift, that lure is going to be where that school of fish was. So aiming to try and get the boat directly on top of that school of fish. So keeping your lure under the boat, using your electric motor to try and help it keep it there, and putting it in front of the fish. Like half the trouble with it, so half the challenge, I should say, is just put that lure in front of the Jew, because Jew aren't terribly fussy. Sometimes they can be, but most of the time, if you can put the lure in front of their nose and do it well, you'll get them to eat.
Okay, cool. So let me just get this straight. So you are fishing vertically. So you're basically using your electric motor to control the drift, getting your line vertically, drifting over where you've sounded fish. And then what are you doing with the rod? Is it just gentle up and down lifts, or, is the lure free falling on the drop, or are you controlling the drop? How do you actually work the lure?
Yep. So once especially if you're in the zone and there's fish on the sounder, you want to be, I just do fairly slow lifts. Some people can do aggressive lifts, but I just like the slow lift. All your bites every time with Jew will come on the drop. So
on the drop, yep.
I'm not sure if the lift is critical to that part, but that fall, that once you've come up, you vibed up the top of your lift, and as you start to drop it down, that's when they're going to eat it.
Yep.
And it's just a gentle, for me, it's just a repetitive, gentle up and down motion. You can do bigger hops, but that may give you more hang time as well. If the schools are higher off the bottom, it could work. But if they're tight to the bottom, then maybe a smaller hop would be a better option. So
are you on a semi-taut line on the drop, or are you letting it completely free fall?
Semi-taut.
Semi-taut. You want to be in touch with the lure.
Yeah. And Chris Cleaver explained that the best. I remember his podcast. He gave a really good explanation on how to do it. And if anyone hasn't listened to it, I highly recommend you do, because it does explain that process really well.
I'll make sure I'll put a link in the show notes. Yeah. What does the bite look like? You said that the bites generally come as the lure's on the drop. What does a bite typically look like? Is it a subtle thing? I know sometimes, when you're fishing for barra with soft vibes, it can be a surprisingly subtle bite and can be easily missed. Is it the same with Jew, or are they usually fairly savage?
Yeah, it's a subtle bite. It's an inhalation bite, so it's that sucking the lure in type thing. So you've got to be switched on because you can miss it, and it's probably not as critical as a barra, because barra tend to be pretty crazy with how fast they suck it in and spit it out. But you do need to be pretty quick with that hook set.
Yep, sure can.
And because you really, if your lure's in the zone, if you know it's in the zone, you really have to be ready to strike on that drop. So you kind of have to be patient. Not patient, but watching that line, getting ready to strike.
Okay, so the slightest little unnatural movement, the slightest little zip off to one side or hanging up with the lure or whatever it might be, you've got to set that hook.
Let it rip, yep.
Okay, cool. And set it hard, I'd imagine.
Yeah, one good strike's good.
Yep.
Set and forget.
Yep.
That's what I was taught.
Yep, okay, cool. All right, mate, anything else we need to know about fishing for either flathead or dewy in the inshore Gold Coast area before we move on to fishing spot number 3?
No, I think that pretty much covers it, and we can move on to
excellent.
Probably my favourite area, Moreton Bay.
Okay. Moreton Bay inshore or Moreton Bay offshore? Where are we going to start?
We'll talk inshore. So,
okay.
Yeah, so this is, anyone that knows me knows I love fishing in the bay, and chasing dewies in springtime is what I really like to do. And it's just a really good time to fish for them.
Mm.
You get big schools coming through and good-sized fish of late as well, so it can be really fun fishing. So over the last, maybe 7-8 years, I've got into it and kind of learned a bit more and refined it each year. And it's a really, really fun way to fish, challenging, and it's local for me as well, so it makes it quite easy to do.
Yep. Now, I do want to delve into this a little bit more and ask a few more questions. But before I do that, I just want to point out we have actually talked about fishing for this species before, same as a snap. We have talked about them as well. And we've also done a sonar masterclass. And if I remember rightly, you were absolutely whipping us into a frenzy with tales of, schools of dew of, sort of 200 individual fish that were coming up on your sounder in Moreton Bay. So lots of Jewfish in Moreton Bay if you find them, mate.
Yeah, there is. And the last probably 2 or 3 months, I've been looking at different parts of the bay and finding dew in different areas that I've never fished before. So that's just me looking at new areas. So you can imagine there's so many other spots there that are untouched that they'd be at as well. So it's quite exciting to know that there's such a good fishery there available.
Now, and if I remember rightly, the other thing that you said when we did that sonar masterclass was a lot of people wouldn't enjoy going out for a fish with you, mate, because you're going to motor around the bay and you're going to keep motoring until you find fish. And if you don't find fish, you'll spend 8 hours motoring and then go home.
Yeah, my son hates me for it. We were just fishing yesterday and we were looking for threadies and dew, and I just, I told him we're not casting until we see them. And he just wants to cast. And
yeah, of course.
Yeah, every now and then I've got to give in for him. But yeah, usually it's a case of if you can't see them, they're not there. And
yeah,
most of the time, and you know what, I'll tell you something, I've kind of changed that a little bit based on some recent events. But I'll give you an example. The other week, like I said, we've been looking for new areas to fish for them, and we found this rock bar in about 6 meters of water. So fairly shallow, and I don't normally fish that sort of structure for dew in Moreton Bay. We decided to give it a drift. I think we were expecting snapper on it, not really dew. And in an hour fishing that spot, we caught 13 dew, and we did not see them on the sounder once. So it was a different style. We were fishing in this shallower water, this fairly hard current, but the fish was sitting really tight to the rock, so tight that you just couldn't see them.
Yep.
And the technique was basically grubbing this plastic along the rocks, and they'd pick it up as it's sort of moving through.
Okay. And was that still soft vibes?
We were fishing soft plastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
And look, that's a really, really important tip there, because, if you're motoring along and you see fish on your sounder, they're there, right? Assuming you're interpreting your sounder correctly. But it doesn't necessarily follow that if you don't see fish, they're not there. So always worth if you find a good piece of structure, particularly if there's a bit of bait on it. But even if there's not, and there's no fish marking up, it's still worth putting a few casts in, even if it's only for 10 minutes or so, just to see if there's anyone home.
Yeah, and I'm glad we actually had a cast there, because it ended up being, a really good find. So
yeah,
I learned my lesson as well there, and definitely going to change the way I look at some spots going forward.
Okay, cool. Now, for somebody who hasn't fished Moreton Bay before, or even for someone who has fished Moreton Bay but perhaps hasn't targeted the dewies, I mean, it's a big sort of fairly big chunk of water. So starting at the southern end, down around the islands there, coming out of the mouth of the Brizzy River, you can go all the way up to Pearl Channel right up the other end and, tip of Moreton Island, all that sort of, there's plenty of water there, plenty of channels, plenty of sandbanks, all kinds of structure. What should we be looking at? What are the sort of, you've mentioned now you're finding dew on different types of structure than you normally fish, but typically, historically, traditionally, what would you have been looking for?
Yep. So I've had a general rule with looking for bigger schools of dew, and that was I want structure that they can hide in. So something that's big enough that the school can get in under. So a wreck is a good example, a big wreck, I should say. Bridge pylons, that's a good example. Big wharfs like at the Brisbane River. So you really, the way I would think about it is I want somewhere that, they've got shelter. If it's generally a rock bar, they'll hold fish. But when I'm talking about schools, I'm talking about those big numbers of 100 fish plus that are up to a meter long. So that's a different sort of scenario.
Yeah. Okay, you've just described a scenario, mate, that's probably going to keep me awake tonight. So thank you for that.
It keeps me awake most nights, and I still struggle to find them most days, but something to think about, yeah.
So you mentioned you're using soft plastics, or you were on this rock bar. Is that where you typically use, or would you generally, when you're fishing these other areas that you'd sort of more typically fish, you're using the soft vibes there?
So again, it's a bit of a mix. Like I like the soft vibes because they're very versatile. They're heavy, they can sink down.
Yep.
And they got good action.
Yep.
Soft plastics as well. I think you can never really discount using plastics. They're just such a versatile thing.
Okay. And plastics, same sort of thing, 4 to 5 inch paddle tail.
So for dewies, my favorite, and I caught my 3 or 4 biggest dew in the last couple of years on this one plastic, but it's the 5-inch Daiwa bait junkie in jerk shad in the baby bass color again. It's like my absolute favorite soft plastic at the moment.
Okay. I mean, a jerk shad's a fairly, streamlined soft plastic. Usually takes a bit of working. It's not like a paddle tail or a curl tail where, even on the drop, they've got lots of wiggle and lots of vibration. How do you normally work your jerk shads?
Yep. Just double hop, retrieve. So cast it out.
Yep.
If it's, get it to the bottom, 2 hops, let it sink, and repeat it all the way back to the boat. So most of the time I'm doing it through schools of fish or through areas where I know sounded fish.
Okay.
So, you want to get that lure where you think they're going to be and then commence that retrieve. So double hop, let it sink back down, double hop. And then if you're out of that zone, wind it in and get it back in there.
Now, would I be right in saying that a point of difference here between fishing for dew in Moreton Bay and fishing for snapper offshore, that snapper fishing, you're going to be casting ahead of the drift. With dew, would you be casting at right angles to the drift so that the lure and the boat are moving along in the same direction at the same pace?
Yep, and it would depend on, like you said, current, type of lure you're using, and where the fish are. So if you've sounded a school, that cast, it's more about getting it to that fish. So if you know that you're about to hit, if you've sounded a school of fish and you're about to drift over them, you'd probably cast a bit further up so your lure's got time to get to the bottom by the time you're over them.
Sure.
If there's no current, then you can just drop it straight down under the boat. So it's probably more...
Really doesn't matter as long as you get the lure in front of that fish.
Yeah, and that's the key with dew. Those schools, and over the last few years, I've noticed this a lot as well, that quite flighty.
Okay.
And so sometimes you'll sound them, set up your drift, and they're gone. So the key is getting that lure right in front of them. And most of the time when you do that, they'll eat. Like I said, they aren't overly fussy, but it's just a matter of getting the lure in front of the nose to get one to eat.
Okay. Mate, quickly, I know lots of dew fishermen are really focused on tides, they're really focused on barometers, they're really focused on moons. Any advice in respect to any of those?
Yep. I guess tides is a hard one because it really is spot dependent. Some spots will fish better on different tides.
Yes.
I guess one thing I can add with tides is I don't necessarily like the tide change, so that the moment it stopped, but as it slows, give me a good time. And I think mostly that's because it gives you a good opportunity to present the lure better with less current.
Yes.
So if you have found a good school of fish, but you're struggling to actually put the lure in front of them, as that tide starts to slow and you can get a bit more traction with that presentation of your lure and you can get more confidence putting it in front of a fish, you'll find you'll get a better chance of catching. Sometimes as that tide stops, the fish will move on or they'll get lockjaw or whatever, so it can make it a bit more tricky. But that slow period, slowing period will help. With moons,
because I think often, and this is the same with dewies, it's the same with kingfish, the same with snapper, mangrove jack in the estuaries, as that tide starts to slow, they get this last little feed, and then on the slack tide, that's when they reposition themselves because they're going to be at a different place, ready to intercept an ambush bait when the tide's flowing back in the other direction. So it's kind of the bait fish kind of scatter, the fish kind of scatter, and then everything resets for the change of tide.
Yeah, that's right. So sometimes you may bang them on a slack tide as well. It has happened.
Yep.
It's just why. So tide is very spot dependent.
Yes.
Like you said, they may move on a run-in tide and go somewhere else on the run-out tide or vice versa.
Yep. Okay. So bottom line is, watch your sounder, just keep looking for fish. And obviously if the fish move, then you need to move as well.
Yeah, and with experience, you'll come to learn certain spots will fish better on a different tide.
And that comes with time on the water, folks. So there's no time like the present to start putting in the time. It's the right time of year for it by the sounds. All right, Nabeel. So anything else about Moreton Bay Inshore before we move to Moreton Bay Offshore?
Probably one other tip I could give, and this is probably based on more on just my own observation over the last few years, but barometer seems to have some sort of effect on the fish. So higher barometer, I find generally results in better success. And a southeaster wind, don't know the science behind this, and this is just what I've learned or from reading stuff, helps bring that barometer up. Northerly will reduce it. You might know the science better behind it than me, but in the area I fish, if you get a northerly wind, that barometer will drop from, let's say it's been at 10, 15, 10, 16, it'll drop down to 1,000. As soon as that southeaster kicks back in, it'll go up again. And I find that they eat a lot better and you find them a lot easier on that southeast wind when the barometer is higher.
Okay, cool. Good tip. So for those that are looking for that little bit of extra information, get out there. If the barometer's not right, if the wind's not right, get out there anyway, because it doesn't mean you're not going to catch fish and you'll still be learning. So, but if you're looking for that prime time, that's a good piece of advice. So,
yep. So this one is probably fairly new to me that I've only really started doing the last year or so, but having now gained a bit more courage to cross the South Passage Bar, I've started venturing a bit more offshore just to fish that sort of region.
All right. Talk to us about what the attraction is that makes you want to cross the South Passage Bar, mate. Big fish and hungry fish and snapper and Spanish mackerel and plenty of other big fish out there. It's actually, if you've ever fished out there, you're fishing these rock islands with water crashing on them, and you can cast into the wash and catch snapper and throw top waters for Spanish mackerel and troll for them, and it's just a whole different world out there. So it's really something different. It's enjoyable. Yeah. Okay. So first things first, let's talk about that bar crossing, because it is a fairly treacherous little stretch of water, that gap that gets you out to the offshore zone. So give us a couple of tips and some bit of advice about what we need to know about crossing that bar. Yeah. So if you've never crossed it, I'd highly suggest you go with someone that has, definitely. The first probably 3-4 trips I did out there, I went either with someone in their boat or took someone in my boat that had experience crossing it. And, really only go on, and I only really went on good weather days as well. So I've only really seen that bar probably at its better side. I'm definitely not game enough to test it on anything dicey. And look, it's just not worth it. No fish is worth dying for. So no, and that's right. That I've got a lot of respect for the ocean and what it can do, and I wouldn't want to push it. No, absolutely. So it doesn't matter what the conditions are. If the conditions are dead calm, if you're not feeling confident, don't attempt it. Simple as that. And if the conditions are rough, or a bit of common sense, don't overextend or don't overestimate your skills and your abilities, because sometimes it's nothing to do with that. It's to do with the boat as well, and the conditions just not being conducive to the boat being safe as it crosses the bar. So yeah, there's so many variables there that can catch you out. So yeah. Tides and winds for bar crossing, mate? Oh, I don't know if I'm the best person to tell you that stuff, but a higher tide is better. You don't want to be going on a dead low, especially that tide, because it is quite shallow. That bar, sorry. Yeah. But, run-in tides are usually easier to cross a bar on. Run-out tide, the current pushing against the incoming swell makes the waves stand up, so it can be a bit more dicey. That's a general rule. Okay. But I highly recommend you seek better advice if you're doing a bar crossing, though. Yes, yeah, and can't stress that enough. Give the Coast Guard guys a call or drop in when you launch your boat and have a chat with those guys, get some advice. There are people around that do training on how to do bar crossings. Lots of ways to get the information, follow another boat out, as you say, take someone that's more familiar with you, lots of different things to do. Make sure you don't take any chances, because it's just, as I say, not worth dying for a fish or two. So, all All right, mate. So let's imagine we've got ourselves safely out across the bar. We're now out in that offshore zone. You've mentioned Rocky Islands. Is that the primary sort of place that we're looking for to go and fish?
Yeah, look, there's plenty of different options to fish. There's reef out there. There's, like I said, those Rocky Islands, and you can go further offshore and fish for snapper similarly to the way I described for fishing off the Gold Coast. So the way that I've done it typically, because I'm fairly new to it, it's all kind of on the fly, learning as I go. I've got spots that I've fished that are based off generic marks on my sounder that everyone has access to, So it's probably more a case of leaning on some old fishing knowledge and having a crack, really.
Yep. And again, having a sounder that will give you a good reading at speed so that you can be looking for structure as you're motoring around.
Yep, that's right.
Yep. Maybe stick a lure out and troll for some Spanish while you're looking for reef at the same time.
Yeah, and that's it. Again, you're fishing offshore, it's a different ball game as well, because you're just in chance of catching so many different species of fish, and you don't know what it could be and what size. Like, we were out not too long ago fishing, we were actually trolling for mackerel, and like I said, I had my son on me on the boat as well, and we were trolling, and he got bored of it, as he would, and so he just wanted to fish and cast. So we pulled up around the group, which is a set of islands out there, and I was just messing around in the boat, fixing something or tying something, and gave him a rod to have a few casts with a plastic, and he hooks up and gets a 140-something centimeter Spanish mackerel from seemingly nothing. So it's like there's a lot out there, a lot of things, and I'm still learning as well of fishing that area, but it's just another option that if you get really good weather and it's over the coming months, it's where I'll be putting my time.
Get out there and have a look. Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
Do the same thing as Nabeel. You don't have to be an expert. You just got to get out there, put in some time, and keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, keep your sounder turned on, and you'll find things to catch.
Yeah.
Mate, with such a variety of fish, this is going to be a really tricky question, but quick, I guess, tip or quick bit of advice on rods, reels, lines, leaders, and then perhaps a few lures as well.
Yep. I think like carrying a good variety of soft plastics, like 5-inch, 7-inch jerk sheds is going to be pretty helpful. That type of lure is very versatile, catches everything sort of lure, and jig head weight. Over there, we're normally fishing from 10 meters to, say, 60 meters deep, probably at the deepest that I've fished out there. So you want to be maybe quarter-ounce jig heads up to 1 ounce to cover that sort of range.
Okay.
And then one of the other cool things about fishing out there is you get the top water factor, so you can fish for Spanish and GTs on top water. So if you're that way inclined, it's that area where you can take your stick bait outfit and have a crack with that as well.
Yep. Okay, cool. All right, mate. Look, I think we could do 10 podcast episodes just on how to go fishing out there. There's just so many different varieties and options and that kind of thing. But we might wrap that up there and move on to your final Southeast Queensland fishing destination for the spring months, which I believe is the Brisbane River. Yep.
So I love fishing the Brisbane River. It's very local to me, and I've been fishing it since I can remember. But it's also spring, summertime. It fishes really well. In my experience, winter tends to be pretty quiet in there for the Jew and Threadfin. But as soon as that water warms up, it picks up, and we've had some really, really good fun fishing for them in there. So I really do enjoy going out there.
All right. So give us a bit of rundown, mate. Where should we launch from? Which way should we be going? Upstream, downstream? What kinds of structure are we looking at? Yeah, what's the spring fishing? How does it sort of pan out in the Brisbane River system?
Yep. So I live on the south side of Brisbane, so I normally launch at the Port of Brisbane.
Okay.
That's probably the most common route. And if you live on the north side, then you'll be looking to launch at Pinkenbar.
Yep.
And we'll be heading straight to the mouth. That area fishes best this time of year. And one of the good things about fishing the Brisbane River is that it's heavily protected from a strong southeast wind.
Okay.
It can be blowing 20, 25 knots, and it'll still be glass along the wharf. So
okay,
it's a good option when things are a bit uncomfortable to fish anywhere else. You can always duck in the river and still have a good session.
Okay, so same deal as out in the bay. I'd imagine you're going to be motoring along looking for a show of fish on your sounder.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a number of areas and spots in the Brisbane River that will hold Threadfin, but most of the wharf that have access to deep water, they're a potential spot for these fish to school up. For the Threadfin especially, they can be spread out all along, up past the Gateway Bridge even sometimes. And for the Jew, I find typically if you're looking for those big schools, they're more towards the mouth, that side of of the wharf. But talking about the wharves, just keep in mind you do have to keep 30 meters away from them. So you just want to make sure you keep that distance.
Yeah, well, it's just just about to point that out. So good stuff. All right, so side scanning. I mean, there's nothing to stop you side scanning along the wharves, from a distance of 30 metres out, spotting fish and casting towards the wharves. So
yeah, that's right. As long as you keep that distance, the port security guys are happy and nobody gets upset.
Okay. All right, so tackle and lures for the Brisbane River, and then we'll perhaps also have a chat about tides and that sort of thing as well.
So my gear's probably similar again for the fishing in the river, with the exception that with the threadfin, because they've got a raspy mouth, you do risk them biting through, chewing through your leader.
Rubbing off, yeah.
Yeah, so what I normally do is I'll basically fish the same gear, but I'll put a bite leader on of 40 or 50 pound.
Yep.
And then attach that to for threadies or fish trap vibe. Like it's the go-to for them.
Okay. How long's your bite leader, mate? It's just a 6 or 8 inch.
Yeah, nothing big. I probably tie it maybe 30 centimeters at top, just so I can tie a couple of lures worth on it before I have to retie it.
Yep. Okay, cool. All right. So Xeric fish traps work the same way as we described for Moreton Bay inshore?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sort of. So with threadies in particular, I find that it's the lift is, you really have to slow it down. So you really have to do a slow lift, and you've got to keep it low off the bottom. So majority of the time the threadies are pretty tight to the bottom, and my lift will only be, I'll be aiming to lift it a meter top and then sink it back down. But try and sink it slower. So again, that semi-taut sort of line, because they will hit on the drop again. But threadies probably a bit more closer to barrow with the hits, where you've got to be fast because they will spit it as well. So
yes,
plenty of times I've had them. I've thought I felt a bite, one on the lure in, and the leader's scuffed, that sort of thing. So they do that. So you just got to make sure you're one, you got a nice rod where you can actually feel that bite transmit through to your hand, but two, be switched on that you set the hook straight away. Because I can lost count of how many times I've missed bites because I was doing something else or talking to someone or bending over to pick something, and you miss that fish.
Yeah. Are threadfin salmon implosion feeders like barrow? I'm not sure if they are.
No, I assume they are, given the mouth profile, but
I guess they've got that big cavernous mouth, so maybe they are, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Jewfish are as well, for that matter. They tend to feed pretty much the same way, that suction sort of feeding mechanism. Yep. Okay. All right. So with the threadfin, as I understand it from having I haven't fished from the Brisbane River at all, but from talking to other people, I understand they tend to often be found where there's a bit of a drop-off. So you have a fairly flat area and there's a bit of drop-off, and they'll be along those contours. Have you found that as well?
Yeah. Well, I guess to describe the way you normally find them in the river is it generally is on a flat, in saying that, like a fairly level area.
Okay.
Some spots you'll find them closer to drop-offs, but generally they're sitting within, say, up from the wharves, maybe 50 meters out, they could be anywhere. And generally that ground is about fairly level, the same sort of depth throughout.
Because it'll be artificially maintained, the water depth of that part of the river, I'd imagine, for shipping. It's
a different ballgame.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
So when you're seeing threadies on your sounder, they can be quite distinctive, can't they? They've got a very distinctive body shape.
Yep. And because Brisbane River mostly, I think it's a mud bottom, so it's quite a dark bottom on your side scan.
Yes.
Any fish you see will come up quite bright.
Comes up, yeah.
So it's it's contrasting to the bottom, so they're easy to pick up.
Yep. And
given their size as well, they show up pretty easy. So you think, picture a grain of rice on your screen, that's pretty much what a threadfin's going to look like.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Yeah.
Give themselves away far too easily. Jewfish, made anything different we need to do or know about them in the Brisbane River?
So similar tactics to chase them on Moreton Bay. They love that structure where they can get in and out, but it's just a matter of finding them. They can be in such a large area along the wharf. I've seen them on the side scan under the wharves. I've seen them 100 meters wide of the wharf. So, and then I've seen them, along a 300 meter stretch. So you think that area is massive. So, you've got to put a bit of time in to find the schools. And it's a time game. If you can just keep sounding, you'll find them. Then it's just a matter of getting that lure in front of them, like I was saying before.
And the trick is not to get sick of sounding around and just start casting at barrow and bottom, which I know a lot of people do. Oh, I'm just sick of looking for it. I'm just going to fish. Well, you may as well go home as fish where there's no fish.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, and people do catch good fish too, just blind casting as well. I have this argument with a friend of mine who he doesn't like using his sounders the way I do, and he just goes, picks a wharf and starts fishing. And, he does catch fish, catches good fish, but he'll catch 1, 2, 3, have a good session. I might go out and catch nothing, but then one day I'll go out and catch 12. It's a different type of fishing, So when you find those schools, you can really rack up the numbers.
Okay, cool. Tides, mate, and other conditions in the Brisbane River?
Yep.
You mentioned that it's a good place to fish when it's windy, but...
Yep, so I like pretty simple, really. Threadfin, I like a run-out tide, and Jew, I like a run-in. So,
okay, well, that's handy.
Yeah, it keeps it simple. So if I head out there...
We've got all your bases covered.
And the tide's running in, I'll be looking for Jew first up, and then the tide changes, I'll go and look for Threadfin and follow that.
Yep, well, that's easy. And does it matter whether it's a big tide? Does it lead up to a full moon, lead up to a new moon, or doesn't it matter? It's just got to be some run.
With Jew, I prefer, well, to be honest, with both, I prefer the smaller tides.
Okay.
I find threadies in particular, they seem to school up more in the neap, I guess similar to barra.
Okay.
Whereas once that tide's running harder, they spread out a bit more.
Yep.
So if you want to make it easier for yourself, you'll find that they'll be more together on the neeps, and it does make it easier to put a lure in front of them when there's a bunch of them rather than just 1 or 2.
Okay. And Jew the same, or is that mainly the threadies?
Mainly the threadies. The smaller tide for Jew just helps with getting a lure to the right spot.
Yeah.
I've found the Jewies to be similar on all tides, to be honest.
Okay. All right, mate. Anything else about the Brisbane River before we start to bring this home?
I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, for anyone that fishes it, if you've got a vibe rigged up and a sounder that can read the bottom clear enough and you've got a side scan, it's a good option. Just got to put a bit of time in and get that lure in front of them, and you can have some good success.
Okay. So not quite shooting fish in a barrel, but not far off.
No, not quite, but yeah, it can. Sometimes it can be, and you'll see the days where there's 10 or 15 boats out there and everyone's hooking up, so it can be quite good as well.
Yep. One thing I have learned though, Nabeel, is that it doesn't matter what species, fish don't read magazines, they don't watch YouTube, and they certainly don't listen to podcasts. So they make their own rules at times. It doesn't matter what we think, they're going to prove us wrong.
That's right.
All right, mate, we're going to bring this home now. But before we do that, I know you've got some sponsors. We've mentioned them before in previous episodes, but they do support you in your fishing. They allow you to come along and share this great information with us, so we really appreciate them. Would you like to give them a bit of a shout out, mate?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. So I'm lucky enough to be supported by Laurent Sounders and Daiwa fishing stuff. So my rods and reels and lures taken care of there, and I've used Daiwa stuff for, I can't remember now. I think it's one of the first brands I ever used. So it's just something I've always used, and I trust. And same with the sounders. It's good to have quality gear on the boat. It does help and make fishing a little bit easier.
Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, we did have you on a live stream for Lawrence a little while back where we talked about how to find Jewfish. And so you've given some great tips there. We've shown some screenshots of Jewfish in Moreton Bay on the Lawrence sounder. You've answered questions from our live audience at the time that they had about finding Jewfish, not just about using the sounder either, but also about tackle and techniques and lures and all that kind of stuff. So I will put a link to that in the show notes for this episode. So ladies and gents, if you would like to go to doclures.com and just click on the podcast tab on the top navigation bar and scroll down to episode 542, or alternatively, if you're lazy like me, you can just type Nabeel, Nabeel, into the search bar. Either way, that'll bring up the show notes for this episode. If you type Nabeel into the search bar, you'll also get several other episodes, but that's good because they're all really useful information. They all link in nicely to this conversation that we've had today as well. So if you want to go into further depth on snapper, Jewfish, sounders, all of that stuff is there. And longtail tuna's a bonus as well that you can go and listen to. So go and do that. That's all over at doclures.com. There'll be a PDF you can download there. You can download the MP3 and take that with you as well if you want. And of course, I'll put some social media links there for Nabeel and for Daiwa and Lawrence as well. So definitely go and check all that out. So Nabeel, I'm going to let you go now. We've had quite a lengthy conversation. We had a bit of a chat before we hit the record button. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. You always share some amazing information that's really, really useful to all of our listeners. Great actionable stuff. No nonsense, no frills, just down to earth, good fishing advice. We really appreciate that you come along and you've done that repeatedly now. And we've appreciated it each and every time. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you out on the water sometime.
Cool. Thanks, Greg. It's been good. I think now I'm well and truly talked out and I'm not really. If you ask me again if we can do this, I'll probably have to move cities and learn something new, I think.
Well, there's the challenge, mate, because we do want you to come back at some stage. So start looking at something new now and learn some new skills for us, mate.
Sounds good.
Good on you. Thanks, Nabeel.
No worries.
I hope today's episode of the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast was not only interesting and entertaining, but also filled a few gaps in your knowledge that might help you to catch more fish on lures. Now remember that if you support the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast by joining Team Doc Lures, you'll get even more help with filling those gaps. And that comes in the form of ALF Plus episodes, where some episodes have extra content. It comes in the form of audio masterclasses, downloads, live streams, and more that my Team Doc Lures members right now are already enjoying. The cost of becoming part of Team Doc Lures is less than the cost of a cup of coffee a week, so it's not expensive, and you can get involved over at team.doclures.com. That's team.doclures.com. So get involved today, help to keep us on air, we'll help you to catch more fish. But folks, in the meantime, until the next episode, stay safe on the roads, stay safe on the waters, tight lines, and may the fish be with you.